1965, the industrial black country town of Birmingham, England. This dreary blue-collar town was known mostly for the warring Birmingham and Aston Villa football clubs and, of course, its steel factories. And it was in one of these steel factories where eventual Black Sabbath co-founder and guitarist Tony Iommi, then just 17, lost the tops of the middle and ring fingers of his right hand in an accident. He was told he'd never play the guitar again. Ingeniously, he fashioned a series of makeshift prosthetics by melting a detergent bottle and molding it into thumb-like structure for his fingertips, and after a period of adjustment, was back playing the guitar. Within 5 years, Sabbath would release its debut album, which hit the UK Top 10 album chart, and heavy metal as we know it today was born. It's against this backdrop of molten metal and steel that two other defining British heavy metal bands would emerge. This is the story of Judas Priest versus Iron Maiden. The year was 1969. The place was industrial West Bromwich, on the outskirts of Birmingham. Kenneth K.K. Downing had endured a heart-wrenching childhood, marked by the harsh realities of Dickensian poverty. From the shame of wearing torn clothes and ragged shoes to sticking around after school for free dinners. Downing pulls no punches when describing his father's lack of responsibility, highlighting his prolonged unemployment and failure to hold down a steady job. Music, and especially the guitar, was a way out of poverty for KK. Plan B was a lifetime of toil in one of the Black Country's many steel factories, and he was having none of that. It was in West Bromwich, as teenagers, that KK crossed paths with an aspiring bass player with a steady hand called Ian Hill. The two lads connected over music and a desire to get out of Birmingham. They resonated with the same kind of music, the same kind of vision. They wanted to make music that would make people feel something, music that would leave an indelible mark. Hill had a steady job in a bakery, but his heart beat in sync to the bass lines he practiced late into the night. The pair joined forces in 1969 and formed the band Freight. The band's journey took a turn when vocalist Al Atkins, who was part of an earlier band that bore the name Judas Priest, joined Freight. Atkins's Priest had been named after the Bob Dylan song The Ballad of Frankie Lee and Judas Priest. When Atkins joined forces with Hill and Downing, they took the moniker Judas Priest. The name seemed to encapsulate the darker, more rebellious tone they aspired to capture with their music, aligning well with the themes of heavy metal. Their first gig? A humble affair at St. John's Hall in the small town of Essington in 1971, with an audience of a few curious locals. Their lineup was fluid during those early days, with musicians coming and going, but the core of what Judas Priest would become was there, in Downing's fierce riffs and Hill's solid bass lines. And thus, in the heart of England, amidst the humdrum of everyday life, a revolution was brewing, a heavy metal revolution. And at its helm were two young men, united by their love for music, ready to take on the world. During the early 70s, the band went through a revolving door of drummers, with John Hinch, Alan Moore, and Simon Phillips all sharing the drum stool at one point or another. But after Atkins departed, they found consistency and reliability behind the mic. Rob Halford's journey to becoming the lead vocalist of Judas Priest began in 1973, when he was introduced to the band by his sister, who was incidentally dating bassist Ian Hill at the time. Born on August 25, 1951, in Sutton Coldfield, England, and the son of a steel factory worker, Halford had been honing his vocal skills in various local bands, including Hiroshima, Athens Wood, and Abraxas. He was known for his wide vocal range, power, and distinctive style of leather and studs that would become synonymous with Judas Priest and the genre of heavy metal itself. Unbeknownst to many followers of the band at the time, this style was also synonymous with the gay community, which Halford was quietly a member of until his coming out decades later. It was this look and his blistering performances that would go on to earn Halford the nickname Metal God. But while the band was playing gigs and preparing to record its debut album Rock-A-Roller, they felt they needed something more. They needed a second guitarist to round out their sound. The original lineup was not complete until one Glenn Tipton joined in 1974. Tipton, originally from Blackheath, Staffordshire, had been part of a band called the Flying Hat Band. When his band failed to secure a major record deal, they disbanded, leaving Tipton looking for new opportunities. Initially, there were concerns about how Tipton would fit into Judas Priest. His background was in a more progressive style of rock, a contrast to Judas Priest's raw blues-based sound. But Tipton quickly proved to be a perfect fit. His joining marked a significant turning point for Judas Priest. Tipton brought a new sound to the band, helping to push them towards the style of dual lead guitars that would become a trademark of their sound and influence countless other metal bands. With Tipton on board, Judas Priest was able to create a more complex and layered sound that set the stage for their emergence as one of the defining bands of heavy metal. Around this time, 100 miles southeast of Birmingham, in Leighton, East London, the street echoes with the thud of a football hitting the wall. The heartbeat of the game pulses through the veins of an East End teenager, more likely to be seen with a football at his feet than a guitar in his hands. Steve Harris, the driving force behind Iron Maiden, was once a hopeful footballer. His dreams were not of sold-out arenas and rock stardom, but instead of grassy pitches and the roaring crowds of a football stadium, and the desire to emulate England's 1966 World Cup hero, Bobby Moore. Harris was a promising player, and even had the chance to play for West Ham United's youth team, a remarkable opportunity. But he quickly found that the demands of professional football conflicted with his teenage, coming-of-age desires.
I can't be dedicated to this. And if I can't be dedicated to something I love, what is it I really want to do then?
This was an existential crisis of sorts for the young lad, but destiny had other plans for him. The universe's rhythm had a different beat for Harris, one that resonated more with the strum of a bass guitar than the kick of a football. The transition was not immediate, nor was it easy. It took an inner struggle, a battle between two passions, before the scales tipped in favour of music. But when they did, Harris traded his football boots for a bass guitar, a decision that would ultimately shape the landscape of British heavy metal.
My sisters and their friends were always dancing about to records, the Beatles, Simon and Garfunkel, all that kind of stuff,
Harris would say. But Steve Harris's first album purchase was a compilation of reggae hits. In his neck of the woods, the prevailing trends were unmistakable. Reggae tunes filled the air, while Ben Sherman shirts were the fashion staple. Doc Marten boots made their way across the streets, and black Harrington jackets with tartan linings were the preferred choice of outerwear.
So most of us what you call skinheads. Wasn't necessarily a great fan of all that. They really bought the album because you had to learn a few of the steps, to throw the shapes at parties. If you didn't know the shapes, you didn't get the birds.
But Harris was particularly drawn to rock music, and he started to listen to bands like The Who, Genesis, Yes, and Jethro Tull. Despite not having any formal training, Harris bought his first bass guitar for 40 quid. He initially took up the rhythm guitar but soon moved to bass, a decision inspired by his desire to write songs and his realization that he could combine the rhythm and melody on this instrument. The bass guitar, a Fender Precision copy, became an extension of Harris himself. His first band was named Influence, later renamed to Gypsy's Kiss. However, it was short-lived, and Harris left to join a band called Smiler, where he first worked with future Iron Maiden members Dennis Wilcock and Doug Sampson. The stint was also brief, mainly due to musical differences. Harris wanted to push the envelope and play more technical and progressive music. Frustrated by this, he formed his own band. In the waning weeks of 1975, Steve turned over a new leaf, leaning heavily on the relationships he'd fostered during his time with Smiler. His goal? A new project, one that would ultimately become the inaugural version of Iron Maiden. This mission came to fruition on Christmas Day, 1975, marking the birth of the band. The original ensemble comprised of Steve himself on bass, Dave Sullivan and Terry Rance on guitar, Ron "Rebel" Matthews on drums, and Paul Day behind the mic. The band was called Iron Maiden, taking its name from the medieval torture device. The band's first gig took place in 1976 at the Cart and Horses pub in East London. These days, if you Google the pub, it bills itself as Cart and Horses, the birthplace of Iron Maiden. The place is adorned with Maiden memorabilia, sells Iron Maiden's Trooper beer, and offers a sharing platter called Number of the Beast 666. Needless to say, it is frequently visited by holiday-making metalheads from across the world. But back in 1976, Iron Maiden was an unknown commodity. Well, not completely unknown. During one of the band's first shows at the Cart and Horses, they received a phone call behind the bar one night. The voice on the other end of the line said in no uncertain terms,
"We're called Iron Maiden, and you can't use the name."
Harris responded,
That's tough shit, because we're called Iron Maiden, so bollocks.
As Harris told music journalist Mick Wall years later,
We never actually heard any more, so it might have been one of my mates winding me up doing a northern accent.
Harris had always desired to have three guitarists, to give the band a more layered feel. Then vocalist Wilcock brought with him news of a guitarist mate of his that, he said, would blow them away.
Well, if he's that good, get him down here.
But the news didn't sit well with the band's guitarists. Dave Sullivan and Terry Rance objected to Murray's joining the band and gave Harris an ultimatum that would force him to pick Dave Murray over them.
Yes, the others made it plain that it was either than Dave Murray. There was no choice, and there was no way I was going to let Dave go. Not only was he a nice bloke, he was just the best guitarist I'd ever worked with. He still is.
With the nucleus of both Iron Maiden and Judas Priest now set, there was nothing left to do but write songs, gig, and get in the studio. But success wouldn't come overnight. The road to stardom was littered with challenges. Both bands had to navigate lineup changes, creative differences, and the emergence of punk rock. Join me for the next episode as we dive into the latter half of the 1970s, a period in which Judas Priest raced ahead, releasing 4 albums, 3 of which would be certified gold, while Iron Maiden was still finding its feet. Battle of the Bands was written, recorded, produced, and narrated by myself, Steve Glaveski. Don't forget to like, share, or subscribe to Battle of the Bands wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, keep rocking.